welcome, Dr. Sabine Hazan. Dr. Hazan is the founder and CEO of progenobiome.com. She is also an accomplished gastroenterologist, scientist, speaker, expert in the microbiome. And she does clinical trials. She also has a center in Ventura, Malibu, where she conducts and oversees cutting edge research on GI issues, etc. She has also been an investigator for different pharmaceutical companies, acts as editor on the Practical Board and a peer review journal. She has been a speaker for World Congress. The list goes on and on with Dr. Hazan. Honestly, we are so thrilled that you're here on We Are the Soil today. Thank you, Dr. Hazan, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I thought that I would dive right into some of the more common issues that people suffer from with their bowels and microbiome. I think a lot of people are confused about what the microbiome really is. Could you explain that in practical terms, what the actual human microbiome is?
Well, the microbiome is essentially all the microbes that inhabit your body. And they can inhabit your body in your lungs, they can inhabit your body in your blood, in your skin, in your gut. My focus obviously is the gut, because I believe everything starts in the gut.
Yes.
Hippocrates said that all disease begins in the gut. I think multiple physicians over the years and decades and centuries have said that. I think we have a gut feeling that there's something there, right? So,
yes.
Our gut tells us, the first thing you start having when you start seeing all these autoimmune processes and neurological problems, and you take the history, it started in the gut, right?
Absolutely.
That have Parkinson's, they started earlier on telling their doctor they're bloated, they have constipation, they're having trouble swallowing. So, I think we need to pay attention more to the microbiome of the gut, because I think it's the factory. I think it's the beginning. It's the compost of our bodies, and ultimately everything ends up in the gut. So the microbiome, in essence, is all the microbes that are all around us, and that go into our bodies, and that ends up in our bodies and in our guts.
Well, I've been reading the book that you wrote, Let's Talk Shit, which is an amazing book. I highly recommend that everyone check it out. I've been listening to it on Audible. You talk about the average human being excretes 300 pounds of poop a year. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
That is amazing. And a lot of people have a lot of different, we all have different kinds of poop. The way we poop isn't the same all the time in our lifetime, especially with women, I think with the hormones and the fact that we seem to have longer large intestines than men. Is that correct?
Yes, and often quite tortuous, actually. Women are a lot more complex, partly because, women go through periods, their organs, their ovaries, uterus is all inside, right? The reproductive organs. And so essentially, you have a baby, and I would always say my job, because as a gastroenterologist, because I see a lot more women than male patients, I always said my job is much harder because the colon of women is a lot more tortuous. I have to say, it's probably, pregnancy doesn't help us, right? And hormones, but when you carry a baby in your belly, you're bringing that uterus up and you're squishing all your organs, right? And then when the uterus goes down, the organs fall down back with it. And you hope that they fall back in the same position that it started before the baby, occupied your belly, but too often it doesn't. And so the colon, takes a dump and then eventually becomes kind of like a roller coaster.
I was going to ask, do you recommend that they do anything to help this situation?
I mean, it's very tough to help that situation, right? I mean, you've got
Mm,
this big belly, carrying a baby for 9 months, and it's not easy. And then you deliver it, and then eventually it falls down. But you wonder if, when the uterus shrinks down back, does it take a little piece of the colon with it down? And
wow.
and maybe that's why women. And then you've got women with endometrial tissue
Mm,
that is occupying the abdomen, right? So that messes up that nice U shape of your colon, right?
mm,
Or your bowels. So, we tend to think of the bowels as just a tube, but really, the small bowels, if you stretch it out, is the size of a tennis court. And
amazing.
the colon is really a U-shaped organ. So, if it loses its U-shaped ability, the bowel movements are not going to come out as well. And so that's why you'll hear women complaining of, gassy and different shapes of bowel movements. Really, and when you do a colonoscopy, you can appreciate that because the colon is quite tortuous. And
Mm.
inevitably, I always document tortuous colon in some women, which explains why they have symptoms. Very
What?
complex.
Yes, we are. What is the most common issue that you see in your practice, in your clinical trials, et cetera?
Well, now I'm more focused on the microbiome. So,
Hmm.
trying to crack the code on Parkinson's and autism. So those are my two patients that I'm trying to see right now. Celiac sprue, I'm also trying to, crack that code in the microbiome. So we're seeing a lot of celiac patients. Obviously for the last 2 years, I've been seeing a lot of COVID because I jumped into
Right.
the fire. Uh, Mostly because I felt like good research needed to be done unbiased and to see
Yes.
the truth for myself. I've been doing clinical trials for so long, and I know the business of pharma and I know the business of, clinical trials. To me, I felt this pandemic was not about a business. It was more about saving humanity and helping people on a global scale. So that's why I stepped in. I was shocked that my two protocols that I put out there, the hydroxychloroquine, got politicized, and the second one I put out was ivermectin.
Mm.
I'm almost scared of putting out fecal transplant out there because now everybody's going to start, making it a controversy. So
Heaven forbid you give ideas of how to help people. And you know,
exactly.
yeah,
And it's already controversial. Fecal
it
transplant
is.
is already controversial because they're trying to make it a pharmaceutical product. The
Hmm.
problem is that fecal material is, in my opinion, is not a one pill solution for all. We're all different in our microbiome, and therefore it's going to be very difficult to match what you started with in your microbiome. And so you're going to swap one problem for another
Exactly. Hmm.
until we understand what is in poop, what is in the microbiome, what those microbes are doing, which there's thousands of them.
Yes.
Until we understand what those microbes are doing, we are basically, we don't know. So you may be taking a pill in the future with fecal material in there. You don't know what it's going to do to you and if it's going to replace one problem for another. So if you're dying of ALS, you have autism, you have, Parkinson's and cancer, I think, in my opinion, yes, there could be a role for those people. I mean, in my opinion, people that are dying should have access to everything and anything.
Hmm.
Their freedom of choice, right? It's their body. And I think we as physicians have to kind of help them in a way, to access these drugs if they want to, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
because by the time a drug comes out for cancer, um, the patient's going to be dead by then.
Mm.
So,
I
um,
witnessed that myself with my grandmother. It was very unfortunate. I'm wondering, in your clinical trials with COVID, what kind of changes did you see in the microbiome with the virus?
so there's a preprint. So first of all, we found the virus in the stools. That
Hmm.
was my first obsession. and I told my scientist, I said, we were looking at clinical trials and doing microbiome studies on autism and Crohn's disease. And my poor scientist, I drove him crazy because every 2 months I'd be like, we need to focus on this now. And we need to focus on this. So I'm like, I'm kind of like one of those boats that goes where the wind takes me.
What's your sign? Sorry, I have to ask.
I'm a Leo.
A Leo, my favorite sign. All my best friends are Leos. That's wonderful. You're shining bright.
Well, I certainly have the hair for it. So, and probably the attitude with it. But essentially, I kept telling my scientists, and then when COVID hit, everybody wanted to stay home, right? And I remember coming to work and I was dressed like an astronaut practically. I was so afraid of this virus. And then he said, I'm not touching COVID. I'm like, no, we have to look for it in the stools. We have to. And then he said, you're going to be spending a lot of money for nothing. And I said, okay, well, if I don't look, I'm never going to find it. And I'm never going to know. And it'll always be, I shoulda, coulda, woulda.
That's right.
And there's nothing worse than I hate than woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Absolutely. No regrets.
Do it now. Try it. Jump in. You never know what you're going to find.
That's right. So did you see that the virus did something different to the actual other microbes?
So we found COVID in the stools first, and that was the first preprint we printed. It took 6 or 8 months to get published. And then once we found COVID in the stools, it became kind of, people started realizing, oh, we need to pay attention to COVID in the stools. The whole movement of the septic tanks and everything, came from COVID in the stools. But also even in China, they started doing those anal swabs. While everybody was looking at what COVID in the stools, I cared about what is COVID doing to the microbiome. And so that was the second preprint that we're waiting for it to be published. We're in the last phase of the peer review process. It's not easy going through a peer review process.
I can imagine.
A lot of scientists, they're like chefs. They criticize your pie. So you basically have to reformulate, rechange the ingredients, rechange not the data, but change the writings to make them understand better your work. So, and it's all good criticism, but unfortunately it takes a long time, and it's very time consuming. So the preprint hopefully will come out. In the meantime, while my preprint was in peer review, 4 countries published the same data, which is that that patients with severe COVID had lower, if not absent, bifidobacteria in their gut.
Wow. Does that mean if you give them more, it could not heal the COVID, but fight the COVID?
Yeah. So it's not as simple, right? It's not as simple because we've seen a lot of people take probiotics and their gut have 0 bifidobacteria in them. So is the probiotic, are the probiotics that they're taking actually killing their gut? Right? Because remember, our bodies are made to create their own microbes, right? Our pancreas is made to secrete its own enzymes, right? If I give pancreatic enzymes to my body is not going to need to work anymore, right? I mean, it's kind of, it's like children. If you give them everything, they don't need to work, right? They don't need to do anything. They're like, well, mom and dad.
So how do you encourage a lazy pancreas to work?
Well, you have to start with small, portions. And then, of course, if you've killed your pancreas because you took those pancreatic enzymes or because you supplemented what you didn't need when you were healthy, it's very difficult, right? So people that have 0 bifidobacteria and are taking these probiotics or took these probiotics and potentially killed their microbiome, they're probably going to need to be on probiotics at some point forever, right?
Wow.
Is this the right probiotic? Is this a probiotic that's working for you? So there's it's not that simple.
What about cultured foods? I mean, that's what we've always used for centuries.
Absolutely. And cultured foods is important if you tolerate it. And that's the cultured food of your, ancestors and what they're eating. Uh,
Right.
I think it's more of a precision medicine. We're
Hmm.
we're still at the beginning of the microbiome research, make no mistake. So I'm not going to say this is this or this is that, because I think, as a scientist, we have to be open to both sides and always be humble to know we don't know anything.
Right.
I'm just tapping the surface. What I'm seeing is I've seen some data where people took probiotics that were over the counter, and I noticed they had zero bifidobacteria in their gut. Did that correlate? Was it because of that? Who knows? I mean, there's so many interpretation of that data, right?
Are the other bacteria overriding? Are they going in and gobbling that up? What would be the reason of why it didn't translate from the
Well,
mouth
I
to
think
the gut?
so. You have a lot of organs from the mouth to the colon,
Hmm.
right? As you're taking, so remember, bacteria in the gut is supposed to be anaerobic. It doesn't breathe oxygen, right?
Right.
As soon
Hmm.
as you give it something that is exposed to oxygen, right?
Like a
Uh,
soil derivative
like a
probiotic.
like a pill that was made in a factory, right?
Hmm.
And all these microbes are now exposed to oxygen, and they're pretty much dead microbes, right? Like, are those, and this is the question you should be asking, are those probiotics over the counter live bacteria or dead bacteria? The second
How do
question
you know? How do you know? I mean, just because it's in the refrigerated section?
you don't know. You don't, you don't know.
Then
So,
that's why cultured foods is probably a better option, correct?
correct. But then the second thing is your cultured food building up the right bacteria?
Mm.
No. Is and I'll give you an example. We did a study recently because I wanted to know what's in my food. Is there, you see all these products that are like bifidobacteria, bifidobacteria. And we took 29 products from Whole Foods and we decided to test them. And you'd be shocked, and the data is going to be coming out of how many products actually have bifidobacteria. Even
Hmm.
over the counter medications that say probiotics, bifidobacteria, the majority, there was a study that was done, 16 out of 17 didn't have bifidobacteria in there.
Oh my goodness.
Even though
Wow.
on the label, what are you trusting a label? You're trusting a salesperson to sell you a probiotic and you're actually believing it? Come on.
Right. Well, as a
I mean, that,
CEO of a probiotic, I mean, I created the world's first probiotic mocktail.
yeah,
I don't even put any of the live organisms that are found in our beverage on the label because, honestly, I think that they are constantly changing,
100.
depending on the yeast that's in the air at the time that we brewed. I mean, there's like so many factors involved
So
that folks don't realize that you can't, it's not cookie cutter.
yes, so many factors. And so, that's a difficult situation because here you are drinking a drink and you think, oh my God, this is good for me. And it's
Not
that,
always, right?
yeah, not always. And it hurts you. And I think, you know, um, eventually doctors are going to clue into all this, and that's why I created Progenibiome. I created Progenibiome for doctors to see the data of their patients, to see, we have a validated, verified lab. So in other words, we do fecal transplant on a patient, we give a donor stool to the patient, we're able to match the donor to the
Mm,
recipient. That tells us our assay is valid. But not only that, the clinical picture reflects the microbiome picture. And we know our fecal transplant worked. So that's a new wave of, so I took what I was doing with fecal transplant to the genetic sequencing lab to
wow.
validate an assay, to basically give that tool to physicians to say, look, whatever you're doing, test the microbiome before and after. Because
Right.
unfortunately, all these stool tests that are out there don't have any clinical data. We're the only one we took what uBiome started with the right concept and we made it legit. We made it
Hmm.
a valid, verified, reproducible assay. Because ultimately that's what science and research is. Is the data valid? Is it
Right.
verified? And can somebody else reproduce it? And can you reproduce it? Can you reproduce it? In other words, is Sabine Hazan's microbiome that I'm testing today, tomorrow, next month, is it the same fingerprint of my microbiome? And that's very important in my opinion. So that's why.
What do you think of GI map?
I'm not going to comment because I don't want to get myself in a hole with.
Okay, I'm just asking because that's what my functional doctor has used in the past, and
well, that's what was available back then, right? So, you know, our test.
Things are better now.
Well, our test is research oriented because I believe that it's all research, and I think consumer products of microbiome testing are really selling an idea of the microbiome. But the problem is we're not there yet. I mean, when you get these stool tests from any company and you see you've got Bacteroides uniformis. Well, what does that mean? Or you've got Akkermansia. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean Akkermansia is part of your genetics? Does that mean that you were raised in an area where Akkermansia was predominant? Does that mean that you ate some food that had Akkermansia? Or does that mean you have something, a condition, right? Because at the end of the day, unless you're doing the clinical trials on everything from diet to races to disease to everything, you're not really seeing the good picture of the microbiome. So
interesting.
All you can see right now, and our lab is the one pushing the research, is the research that I'm publishing that has basically been peer reviewed. So when I say, yes, bifidobacteria is low in patients with COVID, we need to pay attention to that. Bifidobacteria.
Absolutely.
If I say bifidobacterium is low in patients with COVID, we need to pay attention to that.
But how do you get that the bifidobacterium in there is the question.
So that's the big question. And that's
right.
And by the way, it's not when you see a bacteria, for example, scientists will say, and this is the art of doing science and medicine, right? You can't just say, oh, look at this. I found this bacteria. I'm going to give an example, ruminococcus, okay? And oh my God, I found it in this disease. Therefore, the bacteria must be in that disease. No, that's not how you do it. You have to take then that bacteria, put it in a mouse and do a mouse model to show that you've reproduced that disease in the mouse. So like what we're doing right now with Parkinson's, we've identified certain markers. Now we're working on a mouse model to see, is my mouse developing? And then from there, your bacteria could be a culprit. Remember, it's the microbiome, so it's not just one microbe. It's multiple microbes. So,
I was going to say it couldn't just be one for Parkinson's. It could be a combination of the way that they match, correct?
Yes, and it's also a formula that's different for everybody, right? Which makes it even more complex. When I started with autism, we analyzed the microbiome of 300 children. And we looked at it, and yes, there was a potential formula for the majority, but not for all. And then the other thing that we discovered at the species level is how different the species were that were out of whack for so many kids, which brings up the work of Dr. Sidney Feingold, who was a pioneer for autism, who basically said initially Clostridium perfringens is a bacteria for autism. Then he came up with the sulfovibrio. So you, as a doctor, you go, well, which one is it? Is it the sulfovibrio? Should I focus on killing the sulfovibrio? Should I focus on killing Clostridium perfringens? But what we've come to learn is that there is a certain section of kids that have the sulfovibrio, and there's a certain section that have Clostridium perfringens, and there's another section that have other bugs. Kind of like with Crohn's disease is the same pattern, right? It's all about the microbe in that person, in that individual that is out of balance, and it's about the art of knowing these microbes and seeing what they're doing and being a scientist, but also a clinical doctor, understanding, when I see spirochetes, right, that puts a light bulb in me that says, Lyme disease, right? When I see strongyloides, right, that puts a light bulb in me that says, I remember this case of strongyloidiasis in residency where this patient had, pancreatitis and had all these and this pneumonia. So,
Well,
it's
you mentioned killing them. Now, would you use opposing good bacterias? I mean, let's just talk about H. pylori for, like I had a really high level of H. pylori and, different bad bacterias. I mean, is that how you combat? You use the word kill. How do you go about working with them?
Yeah, I don't believe in killing. I believe in blasting it away, but then replenishing. So the art of fecal transplant, what fecal transplant is really blasting the microbiome, killing all the bugs, cleaning the colon, and then replenishing with a new microbiome. But to be there, we need to see what is a perfect microbiome and what is the perfect microbiome for the individual.
And how often does it replenish itself? I've heard that the microbiome changes every 3 daes. What is your opinion on that?
So yes, the surface changes, whatever you're eating, but your signature microbiome, let's put it that way, when you reach the signature microbiome, that doesn't change. Your baseline doesn't change unless you give it things. So if you give it, if you maintain a diet that's your diet, you will see your fingerprint microbiome. We remove, our assay removes a lot of the noise because we remove a lot of the microbes that, we say, well, this could be from eating and this could be from this. So, there's a certain area and location, it's like finding Mars. This is the universe of the microbiome. It's like finding where the planets are, right? Once you know where the planets are, you just have to go back and relook at where the planets are. It doesn't matter if there's a bunch of meteorites around the planets. Not focus on the meteorites. Yes, there's meteorites every day, but you're still gonna find where Mars is. So as long as you know, and we've managed to find, those planets, let's put it that way, in the gut. So we are able to always kind of pinpoint and relook and refine the microbiome. And also that helps us when we give a treatment, right? So if I give a treatment like ivermectin, for example, and I keep giving it to patients, and I know the timing of when it hits the colon, etc., then I know exactly when to look to see the changes in the microbiome on that medication.
Killing the virus you're speaking of particularly.
Well, I mean, ivermectin doesn't necessarily kill the virus. So, that
what does it do?
I can't talk about it.
Okay. Well, let's talk about a different virus. Let's talk about a different virus for a second, because I had a health collapse when I was 24 years old. That's really what inspired the beverage company that I own. And I was on a colonic table and I saw my small intestines swell, and it alarmed the new colon therapist. And I went into the bathroom and then let go of all the water, and it came out like a feeling through my ureter, like battery acid. And then I had a health collapse immediately following that consisted of hypoglycemia, bloating, cramping. I couldn't eat anything for nearly a year and a half. And I look back on that and I, sort of blame the colonics of stripping the beneficial bacteria from my gut. But I'm not convinced, Dr. Hazan, that was really what happened. Looking back on it, I didn't know I had Epstein-Barr virus. I mean, I had mononucleosis as a child, but I'm wondering, what was that?
Epstein-Barr entered your gut because you started off with a dysbiosis in your gut. You just didn't know that you had a dysbiosis in your gut. So,
and why the swelling? Why that reaction during a colonic? Do you have any idea?
When you don't have the proper microbes to metabolize or to process your foods, you're gonna have all these symptoms, right? When you're out of balance, when you have a dysbiosis, which is really out of balance. The whole process and the whole theory behind dysbiosis is really bacteria are out of balance and viruses penetrate, right? Why did we find low bifidobacteria, high Bacteroides, low Faecalibacterium in our patients with severe COVID? COVID penetrated because those microbes were disappeared. So,
Hmm.
so there you don't have, life is about balances. It's a good and bad. It's all about the balance. So
Exactly.
it's not necessarily bad bacteria. It's if they're above the good bacteria, then you have a problem. The process of aging is loss of the good bacteria. Um,
Yeah. And
process
hydrochloric acid too, right?
Yeah, but the process of death, dying, is really those microbes, those bad microbes taking over your body and decomposing you back to the earth. So
Right.
it's the imbalance, and as you age, that imbalance occurs. And whether that imbalance is because a balance between the microbes, or perhaps even a weakening of the colonic mucosa or the receptors that binds these microbes. I mean, there's so many components. I think that's why I'm saying we just tapped onto the beginning, and I think we all need to start looking at this beginning. It
Mhm.
starts with a valid assay that determines, whether, what diseases have what, and how susceptibility markers, and a consensus of scientists from all across. The reason I created the Malibu microbiome and the biome squad was because there was no way I was going to figure out all these microbes. It takes, it takes a lot of experts and a lot of to all sit down together at the table. And
Mm.
what should have happened, frankly, with COVID, you have both sides of the table. One is pushing early treatment, one's pushing vaccination, and both sides should have come to the table and said, okay, well, this is my justification and my justification. But until we see scientists together on one platform, on one, doesn't matter if your hypothesis is out there, you
Right.
come to the table, right? Until we,
Preventative. Preventative has to be acknowledged.
I think we need to join all the scientists, even those that we think are so out there. Bring them
Hmm.
to the table. Let's challenge that. Let's discuss. Why do you think this is? Show me the data. Why do you think your hypothesis works? You would be surprised of how many studies that people think, the person is crazy for having thought that. I mean, look at, H. pylori, right?
Right.
People thought, Barry Marshall and actually Tom Barodi was part of H. pylori. They were crazy, right? I mean, look at fecal transplant. When Dr. Barodi started fecal transplant, doctors thought he was crazy.
Right.
Dr. Einsman, when he started the first 2 fleet enemas of fecal transplant for C. diff, people thought he was crazy, right? Because here we are using a method from the 5th century China. How did the 5th century China know about fecal transplant? They used to give a yellow soup, which was essentially feces, to people with
Wow.
diarrhea. And so,
Wow.
and I don't recommend for anybody to do this today
Yeah.
because kill yourself. But here's uh here's a country or Chinese 5th century where they didn't have the technology we had back then, and by just gut feeling they felt our people are dying, let's try to help them, and this could be an answer, right? And lo and behold, it was.
It was, right. And
So,
now the same technology is being used today. It's fascinating.
and it's being perfected, but we
Mm.
have the technology. Because we have the technology to look at these microbiomes, we have the technology to do clinical trials, we have the technology to do fecal transplant. I think we need to advance because, unfortunately, science and medicine is slow. And, by the time a thought or a hypothesis starts in a person's head, it's 20 years have passed. I mean, how many years have I already spent on microbiome research? How many years has Dr. Barodi spent on fecal transplant? And he's only on C. diff, barely touching autism, and he wants to get into Parkinson's, and I want to get into Parkinson's. I think we need to speed it up because, and I always say this, those in charge will be patients, and at
Right.
some point, it doesn't matter if you're a celebrity, a billionaire, or a politician. Death
Right.
has no mercy. So,
Right.
and you're going to be on your dying bed saying, I wish I coulda, shoulda, woulda.
And you're doing it. You're
I'm
doing such amazing things, Dr.
I'm doing it. You
Hayes.
know why? Because I didn't want to be on my dying bed at
Mm-hmm.
whatever age with Alzheimer's and saying I coulda, shoulda, woulda looked into the microbiome. But now I have
Yeah.
Alzheimer's and I can't do anything about it. And
So
so,
what is the first thing that our listeners can do for their own microbiome? What is the first? Obviously, you have a book where they can learn all kinds of things about their own poop and such, but what what can somebody do right now to take their microbiome into their own hands?
well, I think if people are healthy, and especially after having gone through COVID, if they have not gone through COVID or had very mild symptoms, COVID was the test that you're
Hmm.
healthy, that you have a good gut microbiome, most likely, right?
Yeah,
And
I've had it twice.
so then you've got a dysbiosis there. So that, but did you have a lot of symptoms or were you asymptomatic?
No, I had a really high fever that I ignored and was shocked whenever I went into the ER delirious with a fever that I had COVID and a UTI. So I just went home, took some Tylenol, and was pretty much better, a week
And then
later. And then
how long after did you have COVID?
I had it again then 4 months later, and I think it was Omicron.
Okay, so one wonders if it wasn't the original virus that was in your gut incubated
Mm,
and then basically took 4 months to come back up into your lungs. So that's
mm,
one of the hypotheses that I have. I,
interesting.
I believe it starts in the gut personally.
Hmm.
I believe you're eating foods or you're swallowing saliva that was exposed to someone that was, next to you. And essentially, it starts incubating, killing your microbiome. And then you have that diarrhea where you're breathing in the smell of your poop. And then it goes into your nostrils massively and then into your lungs. So I think that's how I believe it starts. I could be wrong,
Interesting.
but that's my hypothesis. That's why we're all scientists in this. Uh,
Hmm.
and we have to be objective.
Well, this is incredibly fascinating. So, should folks uh,
So
get
the
any
book
kind of
is the first
specific
thing.
tests?
Yeah, so the book is the first thing. The
Hmm.
second thing is we do have a bunch of clinical trials. It's on our website. So I encourage anybody that wants to learn about their microbiome to join our studies. We don't give a report or anything like that because it is still in research. We will be in research for a long time because we need to understand all this. Um,
I'll be sure to tag this so folks know where to
yeah, so
find
for
for
Genobiome,
Genobiome. Hmm.
the good news is there is a about us. There's a little folder called publications, and the publications are all my publications that I've done. So those are a good start for people to educate themselves on the microbiome and what we've done. The second thing is really videos and podcasts that I've done, and your podcast will be on there as well because we like
Hmm.
to keep people current on what we're doing. And then there's the clinical trials and services,
What about fluoride test
so
kit?
the fluoride test kit is basically a research kit that is not a commercial kit yet. We are planning on bringing it out as a commercial kit once it's approved and for the indication that it's going to be approved for. But we do it, we call it the fluoride test kit regardless of if it's in research or not. So, for
Hmm.
example, my autistic children, we do fluoride test. Um, you know, Basically, that's what the fluoride test kit is.
So I have to have a colonoscopy in a month
Mhm.
for bleeding for the past 2 years. And I'm guessing that it all sort of started whenever I got Giardia. And then I got a different protozoa and had to kill both of them off with Alenia and was, passing white material, mucus, and tissue exclusively without any brown stool for a while. And my gut went through a hell of a lot, but and now it's been bleeding for the past 2 years, and I have to go in for a colonoscopy in a month. And he sent me in to do the stool tests, or I dropped my stool off last week, And the test came back so far, and it looks like, low pancreatic, but I have anemia, have a really bad anemia, and they're saying, well, it's not because of low iron. So I'm quite
Oh, really?
curious.
So, I mean, and is it bright red blood or is it,
It's bright red blood that varies depending on, what I eat or supplements that I take.
hmm. Well, definitely that needs to be looked at. And yes, you do need a colonoscopy.
What do
Uh,
you think of the tests that Quest, that they do, typically at a gastroenterologist's office? I
the test
mean,
of Quest are basically, they should do a fecal calprotectin to make sure you don't have inflammatory bowel disease, fecal,
right.
make sure you're not a malabsorbing fat. So your gastroenterologist is very well equipped to do all those tests. What we do is a step further. We look at the microbiome once you have a diagnosis. If your diagnosis is ulcerative colitis, we have a couple of clinical trials with ulcerative colitis, so you're welcome to call my office. If it's Crohn's disease, we have a couple of clinical trials. So remember, I act as a CRO, clinical research organization that does clinical trials with the newest drugs we have, and I pick them very carefully. We have a herb that's coming out for ulcerative colitis that we're
Wow.
doing that clinical trial on. So I'm excited. I love seeing clinical trials on natural products
Hmm.
because I think the world is wanting more transparency with their medications. We don't know the average person or patient does not know what a biologic is or what is in it or how it's made. So they are very weary to be put on these trials and these medications. So, and especially my population, I'm in Malibu. So a lot of my patients do not want traditional medications. They like
No,
herbs and natural
no,
products.
I live in Venice, and I'm right there with them. I
Yeah,
just,
no, and
you
I
know,
get it. I get it because it's funny because I'm in Malibu and I always see my friends at the grocery store and everything, and they're like, "You're killing it on Facebook," because I'm kind of the rebel that's taking natural to the natural path. But I have to say, I was educated into this path by the Malibu patients and the Malibu naturopaths and everything, because we in medicine do not get to learn about that whole world of natural.
exactly.
So it's nice. It's been nice for the last 17 years to have been in this environment where I'm taught by my friends, something that just opened my eyes. I'll give you an example. My daughter had a couldn't sing at a concert, and she had practiced for months and then got laryngitis all of a sudden. And then this naturopath gave me like this syrup that I gave her, and it actually helped with her vocal cords and everything. And then she was back singing. And so, my mind always says, what's in there? Well, why did that work? Right. And then, one of my favorite stories, and I think that was kind of the push that started me into this natural path, was I'm friends with Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo. And
Very cool.
yeah, and their kid was in my daughter's play. And I was at a party after the play party, and I ate like spaghetti, had red wine, a chocolate dessert, and coffee. I mean, talk about the worst thing you could give your gut
Well,
to get
I
reflux.
well that was my diet at 6 months old, doctor. I'm Italian.
So that was like, so I started having the worst heartburn ever.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm sitting there and I'm talking to Neil Spider, and I go, "Oh my God, you won't believe this. I'm having the worst heartburn," and I'm a gastroenterologist, right? And he goes, "Oh, you should take these 2 vitamins. They fix my heartburn right away." So I took them, and within like, I kid you not, 30 minutes, my heartburn was gone, right?
Was
And
it hydrochloric acid? What was it?
no, wait, I'll tell you. So it was a natural product he created, right, for himself,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And they live in Hana in Hawaii, so they're very big with the whole natural world over there.
Cool.
So I go to my husband, who's Dr. Alon Steinberg, cardiologist, etc. And I said, "You won't believe this. I just took a pill from Neil Giraldo, and my heartburn is gone." And he goes, wait, you took a pill from a rock star? You even know what's in there?
Was it red or blue?
Yeah, well, that was the thing, right? I'm like, so I go back to Neil, to Spider, and I'm like, what's in this? And he was so excited because like he literally pulled them out of his pocket. So the next month we met at a restaurant and I started seeing, and it was actually a bunch of natural, like natural products from like, kiwi and a lot of plants and fruits. And it had a little bit of amylase, which is like a pancreatic, which is an enzyme. And I went to, I was just amazed by this, right? And I was at a conference at American College of Gastro, and all my colleagues are all about like drugs and clinical trials, randomized clinical trials and placebo-controlled trials. And I went to one of my old professor at Miami, and I said, Howard, you won't believe this, but I took this vitamin from a rock star, and it helped my heartburn. Can you look at this and tell me what is helping? And he looks at it and he goes, oh, amylase. That was the treatment we used to use before we had H2 blockers and PPI. And I'm
oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me.
So basically, what did I learn? I learned that, if you're stuck and you have all these foods in you that are creating chaos in your gut, a little bit of enzyme, a lot of vitamins and everything helps digest all that fast to get out of your stomach, so you're not having so much heartburn. Because remember, heartburn, if you read my book, it's partly, acid coming back up, but it's also an acid, but it's also the stomach doesn't move properly, right? So if food is like all stuck in that stomach and it's not moving, remember that movie from Monty Python, please just one more pill, one more mint. And then the guy eats that mint. What is it doing? It's opening his valve at the G junction, between the G junction and the stomach, to let all the food out. And remember, he like just, puked out everything because he's decompressing. There's so much in there, and the stomach cannot possibly digest all that so fast. So of course you're going to have heartburn. There's only so much space. People don't realize the stomach is the size of your fist. So if you add foods like, mega foods, and you don't take time to eat and swallow and digest, you're going to have problems. So anyways, that was a learning experience. So obviously I said at the beginning, pancreatic enzymes, you don't want to take them, you don't want to take enzymes if you don't need them, because then you could potentially shut down your enzymes in your pancreas. But once in a while, it's not a bad thing.
So I think I'm lacking them, and I hadn't been taking them before.
Right.
So does that mean I should be taking them now to encourage the pancreas to work?
You have to have a workup. So you have you have to make sure your gastroenterologist tests you for pancreatitis. And chronic pancreatitis is a tough one to diagnose. It's not that clear cut, but definitely, testing of fat malabsorption, testing of, your pancreatic enzymes, amylase, lipase, that's important in my opinion. So.
Well, I look forward to coming and possibly being a part of your clinical trials after we figure out what's behind this this colonoscopy next month. But this has been such an enlightening conversation, Dr. Hazan. And this, I mean, obviously I could probably talk to you for 5 more hours. It's absolutely fascinating. So much GI issues in my Italian family, and being diagnosed with chronic candida for years. And, it's really what inspired my whole career. So, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. It's so needed. And like you said, grab it by the horns. No coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I hope everyone will run out and grab your book, Let's Talk Shit. And I will be sure to share the website as well. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Hazan.
All right, my pleasure.
Talk soon.
Talk soon.